I assume that some of the people who are listening will have listened to us before when we did the introduction to the new scheme. And this really is to give you all an update to where we're up to now and how the new scheme has shaped up. The new scheme now has been passed by Royal College Council, and we're aiming to launch in November. So this is how it's going to be, and we will fill you in with a lot of the details tonight. So although initially it looked as though this was going to be exactly the same as the one we did before, it actually has got quite a lot of new stuff in it. So I hope that you're all as excited as Pam and I are about this. So just to introduce ourselves, my name's Jackie Molyneux. I'm chairman of the Royal College Practice Standards Group. I'm also chair of RCVS Knowledge, and I own an accredited small animal veterinary hospital in the northeast of England. And with me is Pam Mosdale, who is the Practice Standards Veterinary Advisor, and she's a former Senior Practice Standards Inspector. And her and I are going to do a double act tonight, and we'll do bits of the presentation each. And please feel free to ask us any questions as we're going through. So, my screen doesn't want to move on. Okay, so the Royal College, we are there to set, uphold, and advance veterinary standards. And the Practice Standards Scheme is very much part of the advancing of veterinary standards. So setting the scheme, setting the standards is the council, upholding is the disciplinary process, and advancing is the practice, part of that is the Practice Standards Scheme. So the Royal College Practice Standards Scheme, the PSS, is a voluntary initiative, and we accredit veterinary practices in the UK. And by setting standards and carrying out regular inspections, we aim to promote and maintain the highest standards of veterinary care. I think a lot of people, if you stopped the general public in the street, most of them would assume that every veterinary practice has to be inspected and come up to certain standards. Now, to a degree, that's true, because as part of the code, we all agree that we will work in practices who are working to core standards. But of course, apart from medicine inspections, then some practices who are not in the scheme don't have any inspections. And I think the general public would be not very happy about that. So accreditation currently is available within the scheme to core standards, general practice, and veterinary hospital. And those basic standards we are keeping more or less the same. So in the new scheme, you'll be able to come in at core standards, at general practice, in small animal, equine, farm animal, and emergency service clinics. And at veterinary hospital, you'll be able to have a small animal or an equine veterinary hospital. So just to remind you where this all came from, many years ago now, prior to 2005, there were two schemes running. One was the BSAVA scheme, which was sort of more or less the GP standard that we have now, and the BVHA had their own standards and their own scheme where people could become a member of the BVHA, the Hospital Association, and be a veterinary hospital. So the Royal College brought all these schemes together, and we ended up with the scheme that we have now. What is very important for people to remember is that this is not the Royal College setting standards and imposing these standards on practices. Our Practice Standards Group has representation from all of these groups that are pictured on this screen. And we also have a layperson who represents the 16 million population, which is what I always tell her, that her role is very important. But you know, it's very important that people don't think this is the Royal College, the group of us sitting down and just making up these standards. They're all done, you know, by this whole group. So one of the first things we want to know is your practice a member of the Royal College Practice Standards Scheme? And obviously these are 4 answers that you can give, whether you're a core practice, GP, veterinary hospital, or you're not in the PSS scheme. And it'd be interesting for us to see who is actually listening to the presentation this evening. So Wendy will open the poll, and presumably we just give people a few minutes to vote.
Yep, people are just voting at the moment.
Great.
So we have 60% of the audience have voted. We're still having people vote, so we shall give another 5 seconds, and then we shall close the poll and share the results. And I think everybody apart from you, I'm afraid, Jackie, can see the results, so I shall read those out for you. 3% of people have said, yes, we are a core practice. 58% have said, yes, we are a GP practice. 8% have said, yes, we are a veterinary hospital. And 33% of the audience have said, no, we are not in the PSS scheme.
Okay. So, yeah, I'd be very interested to hear, I'm very interested to hear people's comments as we go through, as well as questions. So as we sort of talk about the new things that are coming in, if people just want to send in comments, that'll actually be very interesting as well. So I'm going to hand over to Pam for the next bit, and she's going to carry on.
Certainly am. If you can just move the slides on, please, Jackie. Thank you. Right. So you might think, why would you be in the scheme? Those 33% of you that are not in. So what does practice standards do for your practice now? So if we can move the slide up, thank you. We're doing a bit of a double act here. Jackie is moving the slides and I'm talking, so I apologise if it comes over a little bit stilted. So what the things that PSS do currently, I think one thing it really does do very well is that it's a one-stop shop for all the health and safety requirements, the Royal College Code of Professional Conduct requirements, the legal requirements that you need to practice. So if you have done at least core standard of practice standard scheme, you can be pretty confident that you've reduced the risk of any of those things going wrong, that you're legally compliant, that your health and safety is okay, and that you're complying with the Code of Professional Conduct. It's also a peer review by the inspectors and the current inspectors, and we'll talk about the new assessors soon, but the current inspectors mostly have been in, well, they've all been in veterinary practice very recently, and most of them have been in a position where they've run veterinary practices, so they can be helpful and mentoring and give you advice. So it's a peer review of the practice facilities and the equipment. It can be a very useful recruitment tool too. 61% of recent graduates work or want to work in an accredited practice, apparently. I know that nurses certainly look for accredited practices, and the new graduates, the nurses, when they look for a PSS accredited practice, have the confidence to think, well, this practice will have contracts of employment and will have all these legal things we've talked about in place. So it's very useful to keep up to date with those things. So we'll just move on. Yeah, so I think one thing that Practice Standards has done is make people aware of clinical governance, and I'm going to talk about clinical governance in a bit more detail later on. But really, I think lots of people didn't know what clinical governance and clinical audit and clinical effectiveness were all about until it was introduced into Practice Standards. So I think it's led the way and increased awareness, and it's about you know, trying to make sure that we're practicing as well as we can. It's also a regular reminder to keep practices up to speed with requirements and best practice. It's so easy, isn't it, to think, oh yeah, no, we're all up to date, we've done all that. Yeah, because time just goes by and you think, yeah, we did that, but it was 12 months ago, but actually it's like 3 years ago or whatever. So having regular inspections keeps everything up to date. Also, if you are in the practice standard scheme and have a RCVS, PSS inspection for medicines, then you will not get the routine VMD medicines inspection because medicines is covered in the PSS inspection. The other thing it's useful for, very useful for, is that clients who are aware of it, or if you make your clients aware of it, it should provide them with peace of mind that higher standards are being pursued in the practice. And it can be useful in group practice, in large group practices, to make sure that all practices within the group are meeting the same standards and maintaining and a good way of checking on them. So if we can just move on, lovely. So that was the good things that the scheme does, that the current scheme does. But there was a consultation with the profession a couple of years ago now about why some people were not members of the scheme. And this was some of the feedback that we got. People thought that there was too much paperwork, there was too much box ticking, that it was inflexible, and that it wasn't about outcomes. What they did want was a scheme that was more understandable, and they wanted a scheme that could be a powerful tool for marketing to clients. And very importantly, quite a few practices wanted a pathway to improve and excel. Practices, particularly at GP level, if for reasons of the building or whatever could not become veterinary hospitals, then they wanted another level to aspire